We'll begin this week by talking about the 19th century. The 19th century is when many crucial ideas about modern journalism were actually born. And for us to understand journalism today and the global muckrakers, we need to look back at what happened in the 19th century. There are sort of two main ideas. One is this idea that sociologists talk about a lot, which is the idea of the public. The idea of the public is related to the marketplace of ideas, and that's this idea central for democracy, that critical issues can be debated publicly, that people can decide what policies to pursue or what problems to fix. So everywhere in the world, people always communicated about important subjects. There were pamphlets, there were priests telling people things, there were scribes sent by rulers to find out what the other countries were doing. There were rumors, there were stories that maybe there's a dragon in the next country over. There were all kinds of information and rumors circulating before the 19th century. But for many people, the 19th century was when sort of the newspaper as we know it began to be modern. And that's critical for sort of the development of public opinion and public debate. In fact, French sociologist Gabriel Tarde and many historians believe that there were really three great inventions that unified the public in the 19th century. The printing press was essential because that helped people publish newspapers. The growth of the telegraph was transformative because all of a sudden news could arrive instantaneously. It was extremely useful for war reporting, and it transformed. Instead of a month-old rumor that was appearing in a newsletter or a little pamphlet published by somebody, you actually had real hard information that could arrive quickly. The railways were also essential to the birth of the newspaper because all of a sudden newspapers could be delivered on a regular basis. You knew when your newspaper was coming. Historian Andrew Pettigrew also points out that the move to paper based on wood pulp rather than rags was extremely important for the printing of newspaper. So these technological advances made it easier for information to circulate, and of course the circulation of information was vital to the birth of modern democracy as well as to the birth of the global muckrakers. So all of a sudden newspapers were not only appearing regularly, they were being delivered regularly, and that had tremendous implications. People could get the same information at the same time. This development of the well-informed reading public was so important to modern democracy that the founding fathers of the United States actually subsidized the postal system so that people could get news and information more quickly. So think about that process. Journalists aren't just collecting news and putting it out. They're also filtering it. They're distilling it. And by what they publish and where they put it and how often they put it, they're telling people what's important. That's known as agenda setting. So if a newspaper publishes the same news every day, or they put it on the top of the front page, the public all of a sudden understands this is something important. We need to pay attention to it. Think about the time when all of this was happening. It was the 19th century. There was massive industrialization. Societies were being transformed. People were moving to the cities. People were being uprooted from the land. It was exactly kind of place and time and history that sort of gave birth to the global muckrakers because they had so much that they could write about. So as soon as people started understanding the power of news, people started thinking, how can I use those newspapers, and how can I use that information and pamphlets to try to sort of shape public opinion? One of the groups that were savvy about the power of information and pamphlets and newspapers were the abolitionists. They were a transnational organization. They crossed borders, and they wanted to get rid of slavery. So they started funding journalists and writers to write about how terrible slavery was. Another group, who are sort of the heirs to the abolitionists, who we'll be talking about in this course, are the campaigners who fought against the terrible conditions in the Belgian Congo in the 19th century. King Leopold had the Congo as his own personal terrain. The conditions were absolutely brutal there as he extracted rubber from the Belgian Congo. Millions of people died during the reign of King Leopold. One of the things we'll be talking about in this course is how the reformers who were fighting to improve the situation in the Belgian Congo formed relationships with the journalists who wrote about the conditions there. This was part of their campaign to tell the world what was happening in this far-off African country. And of course, the reason groups like the abolitionists, like the labor unions, wanted to tell the stories about what was happening was they wanted change. And it was the global muckrakers and many of these campaigners thought that they could use the newspaper, the printed word, as a way of persuading people about the problems that society needed to change. To conclude, we saw that in the 19th century, technological advances helped create the daily newspaper and a reading society that shared similar ideas as well as information. We touched on the fact that many organizations wanted to use newspapers for persuasion and influence. Two of those groups were the abolitionists and those who sought reform in the Belgian Congo.